Number one, I would say this, I've discovered this as I've gotten older, is the ability to listen. I used to walk into every meeting getting ready to flog or sell whatever it is that I was there to sell without understanding what the other person wants. Are they open to this conversation? Thinking that I've got the best whatever it is that I'm offering out there without really knowing what it is that the person wants or needs. So understanding what problem are you trying to solve for them? Do they even have a problem that they need solving? Most people do, to be fair, but just listening and understanding what they want. And secondly, probably being flexible. We can all be quite rigid when we carve out a path for ourselves and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to sell this, I'm going to negotiate this, I'm going to create a contract for this. It's difficult to then change tack, change views, take in macro, micro factors and adjust, pivot, especially in short term or with short notice. That's quite hard to do. It's hard to teach that. It comes with practice. And I've been burnt, we've all been burnt with making assumptions or going into conversations with preconceived notions. Try not to do that. You don't know people. You need to listen and understand people. That would be my number one advice to anyone.
Hey, it's Phil, and in this episode of Partnership Plus, we're talking to Yury Glikin, who is a career business development and partnership expert. This is a masterclass in how you can think about the way to forge new relationships, the pitfalls that come with partnerships that you could see a mile off are not going to work, and the ones that are. So without further ado, let's get into this fantastic conversation with Yury Glikin. I hope you enjoy it. So on different occasions, I get a chance to speak to somebody who has been there as an operator in the trenches doing partnership work. And when I came across you, Yury, I felt as though there was a bit of a kindred spirit. And so today's conversation, I think, is going to be a pretty spectacular one, potentially even a masterclass. I won't call it early, but I think that we could end up diving into some really practical strategies and thinking around how we can make partnerships a little bit easier for people to do. So thank you for making the time to catch up today.
Thank you, Phil. That's quite an intro, and hopefully I can live up to expectation, but really appreciate you having me on for sure.
Let's dive straight into your backstory to give some context for what we're going to talk about today. What is the Yury backstory?
Ooh, personal, professional, both?
Let's do both.
So I'm part of an immigrant family and was born in what was then known as the Soviet Union, so a long time ago in a different era. And arrived in Australia when I was quite a young boy. I think I was 10 or 11. So very much have grown up here, live in Sydney, 46, married, two kids, and went through my schooling, university, and pretty much built my career in business development partnerships out of Australia. I've had the fortune of working for companies that are local and global and startups and large enterprise. So learned a lot along the way, messed up a lot of things along the way, and hopefully found a bit of a niche for myself in this partnerships world, as you call it, and hoping that whatever we talk about can potentially inspire or give some learnings to somebody else that tunes in and listens.
Yeah, fantastic. I feel when I talk to people like you that there have been a couple of inflection points in your career where somebody or a circumstance has created a light bulb moment, which made them think actually the way to grow, the way to innovate, the way to solve big problems is actually in most cases not to go it alone. It's actually to do it in partnership with somebody else. Was there a circumstance like that for you that you can talk to that sticks in your mind even today about how this idea of partnerships became a really important part of your professional journey?
Well, I guess we can probably go back to the very first deal which I've ever done in my very first company. So I would have been in my early 20s, and I've always found myself to be generally quite good with people. I love talking, I love creating ideas and seeing where they lead. So I fell into my first job purely by accident, and obviously happy to chat about that if the opportunity presents itself. But the very first deal in my, I've come from a very extensive travel background back a long time ago, very different to what travel is now for most people, where you can click on a button in an app and you have a booking ready to go. This was a very different in the 90s. And I was working for a accommodation website, which has long since shut down. And a friend of mine, now a great friend, a former colleague, was working for a travel brand called Viator, which some of your listeners hopefully know, which has a great array of activities that you can book online, now owned by TripAdvisor, I'm pretty sure. And that deal was the first one that I ever signed, ever inked effectively. And it made such perfect sense once it came to fruition, because we were selling accommodation around the world. He was selling activities around the world. He called me up when I started my first job, and a few months later we had this deal, and it was on probably for about 15 years before the website was sold off and to the Expedia Group many years ago. And I realized then that A, this is just a lot of fun to do, and we're collaborating and creating really cool things together, and B, partnerships is just the way of the future in terms of growth, bringing two groups of people together, two audience sets together, two entities, two businesses together to create something fun, the sum of which is bigger than its parts. So this would have been in 2000 or 99 even, so a long time ago. And haven't stopped having fun since then.
There are many stories of what will appear in history as being those pivotal kind of moments. What was it about this guy that helped you move into a mode of partnership?
I guess that he'd been doing it longer than I had. So he's a bit older than me. So he was one of the founding members, one of the founders, I should say, of Viator back in when online travel was barely a concept for most people. It wasn't even a thing in the 90s. And so he'd been doing it for a few years before we connected in this venture. And I saw his enthusiasm for it. And he told me about how he'd done a number of deals globally. He was the global partnerships manager for Viator at the time, a great friend still, 25 years later. And I saw the excitement that he had, the buzz that he told me about whenever he got a deal done, not just from a self-fulfillment in terms of, hey, I've created some revenue for myself or the company, or I hit my KPIs, but he made a fun thing happen that'll benefit people. And travel is one of those industries that I've had many years in it, and there's genuine joy in what travel brings, probably more so than most other industries, I would say. And the fact that he was making that happen got me thinking that maybe this is something I could do, and continued on that journey through my career in online travel and beyond. But being able to create something that then you can immediately see the positive value it brings for a large amount of people. Not that you know who they are necessarily, you don't get any real-time feedback, but you can just see as the volume rises, the numbers go up, and people are enjoying the service that you effectively help to carve or bring together. That really put me on the path that I'm still very much on.
I love that. And there is something quite profound about that idea of joy, isn't there? It doesn't matter what sector you're part of. I think when two parties come together and they sort of find people who are so aligned to try and solve a similar problem, and there's an acceptance that that other party could actually hold the missing piece to what you were trying to do, and all of a sudden an acceleration continues. I find it so interesting that there are people who consider other companies their competitors, and when they take a very different look at them and they start to go, well, actually, have we asked ourselves the question why they're excited about that same problem? And maybe, in fact, they've just got a different way of capturing the opportunity. Perhaps we should be thinking about them differently, not so much about competitors. Maybe they are, in fact, partners and we've got this wrong. But that joy is the same. I've been part of many deals where all of a sudden people have realized we're not in this alone and we can start doing some really cool stuff together.
Yeah, indeed. That term, I guess, overused sometimes, co-opetition, is, I used to think it was a bit of a kind of a made up, sort of a marketing word, but it makes sense. Like, clearly you compete. Competition is what drives enterprise forward, obviously. But sometimes you do find these moments where you think, hey, we can actually do something cool. We have adjacency to each other and we don't necessarily need to fight all the time. Let's make something happen. And that's a great story when it comes together.
we're talking from a point of view in the 90s, the early 2000s. An enormous amount has changed between now and then. What do you see as been the really significant evolutions in partnerships over time?
Look, I guess I started way back in very, very basic, what was called affiliate marketing, still very prevalent now, but kind of your straightforward links before Google knew what was going on and would step in eventually to kill some of the more, shall we say, questionable practices that we all engaged in back in those days. So very basic referral links, affiliate links, link farming even, and has evolved into massive large commercial enterprises, different business models, different ways that you can purchase media, and different ways that you can utilize social media channels, which didn't even exist when I first started. Obviously, Facebook is now 20 years old, I think, from memory, launched in '04. Influencer marketing, all of these things were, let alone a concept that didn't exist. So partnerships now come together in the most incredible ways, in the most innovative ways, using platforms, channels, and mediums that we didn't know about because A, we couldn't conceive of them, and B, they genuinely didn't even exist compared to, the internet. I'm really aging myself here when I say this, but the internet was only really, I guess, 10 years old or less when I first got into this world in '99, if I remember correctly. So the level of innovation in terms of how to create a deal and how bring a partnership to life has evolved and re-evolved, dozens of times since then.
And how do you stay ahead of all of that information? I mean, we'll talk about your current company in a second, but you've seen this go through many different evolutions. What is the Yury playbook for trying to test and learn and try and find a way to stay ahead and understand what these trends are? Because there's a lot of different tactics that have very short lives, but there are also some that have persevered the test of time. So how do you sort of stay abreast of all of these different strategies and tactics?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, like most people, I try and stay across the trade media and publications and seeing what's going on, reading trade news as well as normal news, catching up on different platforms like YouTube and stuff to see what's going on. But of course, I find that most value is from talking to people who are not in my industry. I've changed industries a few times, especially recently. It can be very easy to get stuck in your bubble. So if you're in travel or SaaS or media or tech or product, you kind of just get locked in your world, sometimes for years. And I'm lucky and fortunate enough to have a very large network from my career here in Australia. Many of my friends also live and work abroad. So trying to catch up and check in with them to see what they're doing in the industry that they're in, maybe picking up some tips from there that I can apply, or just trying to stay across the trends to see what's new, what's innovative, and how people are solving problems, whether it's commercial, tech, new marketing opportunities or channels. Just trying not to go too far down the rabbit hole that I'm in and get lost in my own world, because the world is big. Business is continuously innovating, especially, you'd argue US is probably driving that forward. So keeping across what's going on there, as well as Europe, some amazing innovation coming out of Southeast Asia, and just staying across trends and having conversations with people. There's no real silver bullet. You just got to be aware, lift your eyes above the waterline as often as you can.
Yeah, that's right. And just be curious, right? Like just always be wondering is there obviously a better way. What do you think in terms of the skills for someone to become very proficient at growth through partnerships? I mean, we have, you and I have a history where we've got a natural affinity for people and understanding, and trying to forge a partnership is sort of, I imagine, the default setting, as opposed to maybe pursuing relationships in a different way. What are some of the traits that you think are really important for somebody to cultivate over time to have a partnership-driven growth mindset?
Number one, I would say this, I've discovered this as I've gotten older, is the ability to listen. I used to walk into every meeting getting ready to flog or sell whatever it is that I was there to sell, without understanding what the other person wants. Are they open to this conversation? thinking that I've got the best whatever it is that I'm offering out there without really knowing what it is that the person wants or needs. So understanding what problem are you trying to solve for them? Do they even have a problem that they need solving? Most people do, to be fair, but just listening and understanding what they want. And secondly, probably being flexible. We can all be quite rigid when we carve out a path for ourselves and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to sell this, I'm going to negotiate this, I'm going to create a contract for this. It's difficult to then change tack, change views, take in macro, micro factors and adjust, pivot, especially in short term or with short notice. That's quite hard to do. It's hard to teach that. It comes with practice. And I've been burnt, we've all been burnt with making assumptions or going into conversations with preconceived notions. Try not to do that. You don't know people. You need to listen and understand people. That would be my number one advice to anybody.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the overriding metric of closing a deal and having sales, I think, can blind people very significantly to, well, if we play the long game here, we might not close one deal to begin with, which was a short-term, smaller kind of arrangement. But by listening and understanding and cultivating that trust and that desire to want to learn exactly what the problem is, I find that it ends up building much larger opportunities down the track, which just do take some time because no one's going to engage in buying and selling on the first go round. And I feel as though for those in sales who want to make that transition across to business development, you've really got to want to learn and understand and look at that longer game.
Yeah. And I'll call out that there's a fundamental difference I've learned now between business development partnerships and sales. Sales can be very transactional. You might not have a relationship. You might not have any long-term opportunities. It's just hit your goals, check off the numbers every day, every week, whatever it might be, which is completely fine. Mm-hmm. That's also the engine room of business. But BD partnerships, a true essence of a partnership is just that. It is value creation for both groups or more if there are more than two. And that's not sales. It's quite different. So spot on. It's just seeing beyond that initial buzz you get from having a signature on a contract. There's a lot more to it than that, no doubt.
Is there a mentor that you have stayed close to over time that has helped you build out this skill set beyond the colleague you mentioned before in that first deal? Is there somebody who has been or people that have been quite pivotal to help you sort of develop this skill set and this sensibility around growing through partnerships?
Yeah, I have two actually. Is it okay if I name them? I guess, yeah.
Sure.
Terrific. They both deserve calling out. One is quite recently from the role that I had before, the one that I'm in now, and his name is Eyal Steiner. He's a vice president, or was vice president for a company called Outbrain, where I spent a couple of years. They're a native content platform, if you will, for running advertising, global business out of Israel. Wonderful, innovative, great people. Eyal was the first person on the ground in Australia and then climbed the ranks into the C-suite. And I was fortunate enough for him to be next to me physically and metaphorically speaking in terms of our office in Sydney. And he has this rational and calm way of distilling every problem, no matter how large it might seem to me or my colleagues or my team at the time, into very core base element and just break it down, because sometimes it can seem so big. The problem can seem insurmountable or urgent or everything's falling over. And it's rarely that. It's usually something that we assume in our own minds. It's a perception that we form. He had this incredible way of just pausing and breaking it all down. And when we did that together, everything just seemed doable. Where we would have a plan, we'd approach it from a different angle, we'd try and engage different people. And I was very grateful for that because, like all people, even though I've gotten a lot more experienced over the years, we're all prone to flying off the handle, as the saying goes, and making rash judgments, being subjective, letting emotion get the better of us. And he was kind of my rock of calmness, so to speak. And we still catch up regularly, even though we both moved on from that business. He lives very close to me here in Sydney, which I'm very grateful for. And the other gentleman, this is going back a fair while now, when I was working in media for what was then known as 9MSN. Some of our older listeners will probably know that name. I'm sure you know Phil as well.
Indeed.
That's long since shut down and become MSN. And the Microsoft share was sold out. They sold that share a long time ago, but he was I guess it was commercial director or something similar at the time. His name is Michael Alara, and I've never seen somebody being able to influence and manage up, which is another skill I discovered after some years, more efficiently than him. He had this very quiet. He actually spoke, I think, deliberately quieter than he could, so that people have to kind of metaphorically and physically almost lean into it.
Lean in to listen. That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I've never seen anyone do that before, and never saw him lose his temper. Never saw him get angry. Like the media world back then was just was crazy. There was so many things going on. The business was very large at the time. It was the number one website in the country. There was so much happening. This was back in the sort of late 2000s from memory, early 2010. And he taught me a lot. I was only really in my second job, still understanding partnerships, talking to some very big people in very big companies like Cars Guide and eBay and these big names that I was really confronted by talking to senior people. And he had this aura of calmness, which really resonated and almost transitioned to me. When I was in his presence, I felt myself calming and focusing on things rather than letting emotion take over. And he has 3 young kids now. So unfortunately, we don't see each other as often as we used to, but I've never forgotten the experience I had being under his tutelage. And it wasn't deliberate. He didn't sit there and go, Yury, I'm going to teach you now. It just kind of happened organically, which I think is what best leaders do. Best managers and coaches do that. They make you better without even trying. So a really great man and a wonderful entrepreneur. And he was one of the co-founders of Cluey Learning, which is a wonderful business that I'm sure people have heard of as well. So truly grateful to him and Ayal for helping guide me on this never-ending journey that we're on.
So you've moved to a company called Thanks. Let's talk about that for a second and understand more about how the influence has played from all of this life into what you're currently doing there.
Yes, so very new business and super excited to be a part of it. It's less than 2 years old. Not a lot of people will probably know that name, but it's very likely that you would have seen the work that we do, or at least the product, so to speak. So if you've ever transacted on an e-commerce platform or a ticketing site, you might find that you'll see offers that appear when you finished your transaction, typically on a checkout page. Very common, very well-known channel now that started probably 10, 12 years ago. So we're only 2 years old and iterating, I think, on what came before us, trying to really create that moment of excitement, customers being thankful, hence the name, founded by a couple of guys who are ex-Zip, the buy now, pay later service, started out of here as well, who realized a couple of years back that the journey of an e-com site or a ticket site or any website really doesn't need to end on the thank you page, which is forgotten by a lot of people. There's actually an opportunity to create a moment of excitement, a moment of interest, and really make money along the way. And that's what we try and do. We try and make it a great experience for customers, which is always at the forefront of what we're thinking about. A successful channel for our advertiser partners, which is my job. I look after the partnerships there in terms of getting advertisers on board, and the publishers and the sites that host the experience of Thanks to make sure that they see it as a good channel for creating revenue where they weren't before. So if we can make all those 3 things happen, then we're doing a great job.
Super interesting. And it's funny how these properties, I mean, sort of in a digital property sense, the places which are very obvious touch points that get very neglected through sort of certain steps of a journey. And then all of a sudden people realize, actually, there is not only just dwell time here, there's also the opportunity to convince somebody to take one additional step that they ordinarily wouldn't have taken again. I think it's very, very interesting. Yeah. Yury, when let's pivot quickly to, strategic partnerships and what makes them successful. So you've seen countless numbers of these, I'm sure. What are the core ingredients to a really fantastic, robust and enduring long-term partnership?
Look, of course, would vary significantly depending on the deal and geography and so on. But I've always found that the most important thing are people on both sides. Again, let's assume there are 2 parties. People on both sides who are engaged and leaning in. If you have one side that's really focused and engaged and driven, and the other side that's apathetic, kind of sit back, then it rarely works. You can't have one without the other. The other one I would say is having a very clear understanding of what is the outcome, what is a successful partnership for everyone involved. And that needs to be predetermined, because assumptions are made very often. Assumptions are wrong. In fact, Phil, do you allow swearing on your podcast?
Sure.
Excellent. So I have a tenet by which I live for many, many years. And for anyone sensitive, I apologize in advance, but it's assumptions. Assumption is the mother of all fuck ups. So do not presume anything. You need to understand, what is everyone going in this relationship, this future engagement? What is driving them? What are the core elements that they're looking to get out of it? And if you agree that and you make that known to each other from the start, it's likely to be successful. And the last thing I will say is, for the love of God, just have as few meetings as possible. Meetings just kill fun. They kill the excitement when you have to have, a weekly roundtable, regroup, stand up, whatever it is. Unless it's absolutely necessary, just don't do it. There are so many ways to collaborate now and connect around the world with Zoom, Slack, any number of sharing platforms, any number of collaboration tools. Just do that. Just don't have meetings. People come in, sit down, hours are wasted, pointless conversations abound. Don't do it, honestly.
Was there a partnership that absolutely blew your mind in the last 10 years where you didn't see it coming?
I'll call out a couple, only because they're incredibly different in terms of the collaboration itself. One was, I had the privilege of working at booking.com for a number of years, which I loved, a wonderful business, and one of the few companies that I think has maintained that incredible culture, even though they're now a $100 billion behemoth with 15,000 people around the world. They had this tenet of Booking Blue, where you could tell a booking.com person anywhere in the world. So wonderful bunch of people and fantastic 4+ years there. But one of the deals that I closed off just before leaving that business was collaboration with Telstra. An incredibly difficult deal with so many different elements that had to come together: due diligence, tech, product, legal, from our headquarters in the Netherlands to Telstra's headquarters in Australia, obviously. And Phil, it just aged me, metaphorically and physically speaking. It took almost a year, and it closed just before I left. And this is now almost 5 years ago. And I was always questioning, I thought, look, I get Telstra has a wonderful loyalty program, a fantastic business, obviously. And I always thought, would this resonate? Would people who typically expect to get deals on phones and hardware and data be open to this relationship? Like travel, yes, it's relevant, but it's also a bit tangential. And the team that looks after, my friends that are still there, the team that looks after that partnership, tell me it's an absolute raging success, which gives me a little warm ember of positivity that's kind of still burning inside me, knowing that I made that happen with a great team of people around me. So I didn't expect it to be as good as it was, and it ended up being awesome. And the second one, which is completely different, was I worked for a stint at a company called Fiverr, which is a global freelance marketplace. Really cool for those who don't know it. Very similar to Freelancer.com and Upwork and a number of others. So running their Australian business for a couple of years through COVID. And they were looking to partner with content creators, which is kind of the first time that I ever delved into that world. And I commissioned a long form ad, if you will, with a guy called Tom Thumb. For those of you who don't know him, he's an Australian beatboxer, one of the best I've ever seen. If you want to look him up, it's spelled THUM. Incredibly talented guy. He's done TED Talks and so on. And by leveraging creators on the platform, actual musical freelancers, Tom created an ad. It goes for about 4 minutes, the whole video, which is a showcase for Fiverr and the musical talent you can find on the platform. Which is to say, he created a beat using his voice, and then he found creators on the platform to replicate it using musical instruments. It is genuinely the coolest thing I've seen in years. So if anybody's interested, it's got tons of views. We got a heap of traffic, lots of organic media that was generated off it, and purely coincidental. Like, I love the guy. I reached out to his management team, and that came together. So it was a one-off thing, but still a partnership that I even go back to that YouTube video every once in a while and just watch it again because I love it so much.
Let's double click on that for a minute, because Fiverr. So I use Fiverr and have done extensively. I think I've been part of 130 odd gigs on Fiverr. There is something really spectacular about how Fiverr has found a way to unlock access to talent in so many different parts of the world to execute on so many fantastic skill sets that often most of us don't possess. Just to give you a couple of examples, a video editor in the Ukraine who has been working with me on a number of our videos, SEO specialists out of the States, podcast editors out of Southern America, graphic designers out of Mexico. And all of these people, I can't think of one who has not been hungry and willing to engage with a complete stranger on a job, which is obviously very important to us, but they've found a way to become part of our lives. And I could not speak highly enough of Fiverr as a brand and as what they've built. It really is something else. And look, our business, which operates with a lot of virtual assistants and a lot of freelance help, certainly wouldn't be able to do what it does without access to a platform like that. And it does feel like every time we engage, it's rare that we only use a freelancer once. Often it's 4 or 5 times minimum is where we start, because we just forge a relationship with them, and it just becomes better and better every time we use it.
Yeah, absolutely. A great business.
If somebody is just listening to this and said, look, I've been convinced, Yury, you're right, we should be doing more partnership-driven work. What should a business start to do to organize itself to have a mentality and a mindset that allows them to go, let's go and build a partnership capability that allows us to have a muscle that allows us to extend the offer to engage with other businesses to grow? What do you think? What would you be saying to those CEOs and the C-suite around the table if they've really traditionally just gone it alone?
So number one is, we have this predisposition that whatever we feel is the right thing to do must be the right thing to do. And that's not the case. It's not what the SLT thinks around the boardroom table. What will your customers think of this? Is it a partnership that's genuine? Does it make sense? Will it create incremental value? Not because the CEO or the CMO thinks it's a cool thing to do. Many people have fallen into that trap. Like, I'm no exception. But it's always about, what does the customer want? Keeping the customer central at that focus of, how will this partnership benefit them? That's always number one. If it feels fake, then it probably is. So just don't do it. And secondly, look outside of the immediate world that you're in. Back in the day, partnerships I guess they were built around your industry. So especially, like I said, I've come from travel, so it made sense. If you're an airline, you partner with an accommodation provider or a car hire company and so forth. But partnerships now exist there are so many different ways that you can carve a partnership with 2 brands coming together that really made no sense at the time. Just some examples that I was thinking in advance of coming on here. What is it that I've loved recently? And, Uber and Dettol, which I think was forced more so by COVID than anything else. But that made no sense, right? Like, so relevant, but yet completely nonsensical if you just to float that on a whiteboard session. Or I think it was Binge and The Iconic, which was almost like a half joke, where they developed a bunch of activewear to wear indoors when you're watching Binge. Like, they're fundamentally different things. One you do outside, one you do inside, and yet they made it work. So just be creative. Think about what can be fun. Yes, you want to obviously make money, profitability, share, price. We know all that. But if you have the ability to try and experiment, maybe it won't come off, but just look a bit further afield. They're absolutely the 2 things I would say. And we did touch, the other stuff we touched on before is, don't make assumptions, listen first, try and understand if the other party sees the same value in the partnership that you do, and go from there. And it won't always work. And I've had obviously partnerships that have failed, and that's fine, but just have a go and be creative. Don't be locked in your box that you're in from your day to day, which is hard to do because we get stuck in that box a lot. So spread your wings a bit and see what else is out there.
It's great advice. How is that different to a small company wanting to partner with a large one?
I don't think it's fundamentally different. When I was working in travel, again, to use an example, I worked for one of my very early jobs was, again, in the travel industry for a comparison website. Still around. It's called Hotels Combined. Again, some listeners hopefully know it and use it. And it's long since been subsumed into the Booking.com Booking Holdings group many years ago. I think it was purchased in 2017 or 2018. It was a tiny business. We had about 40 people in Sydney, started by a couple of guys in the travel space that I've known for years. I think I was the 10th or 12th employee. And after a couple of years, we got approached by Ryanair, an absolute behemoth of a business. Everyone knows it, of course, if you've ever flown in Europe, and even if you haven't. Notorious for squeezing every last dollar out of every deal, a CEO who's borderline insane and does all sorts of crazy things, but the brand is working, the business is growing. So we were tiny compared to them, obviously, but they found something that we could help them with. We could add value, and that is to create a platform for them to have a hotel or accommodation comparison engine. And we had great tech. And that's one of the things that a small company can do. And you see these acquisitions that are happening now through venture capital or others. People acquire knowledge and technology. And you could be a small company with 5 staff, 10 staff, but you've just landed on a wonderful piece of tech, a product or an innovation that bigger companies can't do as well because they take longer to move. They have other priorities. And sometimes being big is a blessing. Sometimes it's a curse because to pivot and to change direction for a large enterprise is quite difficult. There are boards, shareholders, etc. When you're small, we have barely a dozen people at the moment, but obviously growing quickly. We can innovate and come up with new things and new ideas and just try different stuff. And we have a great product. I believe in it. And we're partnering with some big names because ultimately we can be where their customers are and we can deliver them the outcomes they want. So if you can prove that you've got something that this large enterprise wants and needs, they will partner with you. It doesn't always have to be, Nike and Coca-Cola. It can be somebody small creating something wonderful for somebody big and actually helping them to plug a gap that they would otherwise have taken years to do on their own. So being small in this case, I think, is a benefit rather than the opposite.
It certainly sounds like it. What do you think are the common mistakes that companies make when they enter into partnership?
I guess treating a partnership as like a one of transaction, almost like a sales initiative, rather than looking at long-term value. We touched on this before. So some people are looking for, how can I get immediate sales uplift right now? How can I make most money now? And you might burn the other partner and they'll never want to work with you again. Yeah. Or they'll feel like they're being used. So a lot of that happens when you just want to create something quickly, whether it's for a campaign or for some other reason. But there's always value in thinking, where do I want this to be in 2 years or 5 years? And some of the best collaborations are built on that. People that created this partnership years ago are still going. So that's a common mistake because you get blinded by what's possible immediately, rather than knowing that this might take 6 months or 12 months to come to fruition and see the real results. So be mindful of that. I'd also say coming into a partnership negotiation or discussion having preconceived ideas about what is this deal, what do the people want, what value is it bringing. We come into every conversation with preconceived notions about who we're talking to, what we're talking about. It's human nature. Like, it's impossible. It's not impossible. It's difficult to change that. So if you come into any discussion set on a particular way of having it, and the other person doesn't meet you on that same path, you're likely to have challenges, I would say. Yeah. And again, we did talk about this earlier, going into a partnership or going into a collaboration or any kind of a relationship because the boss said so. Like, go and partner with this person, or the CMO reckons This is what I saw, and I talked to the CMO of that other business. We should be working together. And the people below that are kind of wringing their hands going, but it doesn't really make sense. No, go make it happen. That obviously happens as well. And more often than not, it's likely to fall apart just because you're talking cross purposes. So it typically won't work.
I wonder, this is a big question, but I wonder your opinion on what is this future of partnerships that we're staring down the barrel of at the moment. You mentioned before that there is, the future is one of partnership and growth. Mm. So, when we sort of forecast into the next 10 or 20 years, what do you think we're walking into in terms of the future? Is it going to be a lot richer in terms of partnerships? Are we going to get smarter about how we do this? Obviously, technology is going to play a massive role. Like, how are you feeling about that?
I think that partnerships at their core will always be partnerships, coming together to try and make something valuable for everyone involved. That I don't think that's going to change. It hasn't changed in, as long as business has been around. But I definitely feel like there's going to be more collaborations or partnerships between brands that you wouldn't necessarily think make sense at the time. It's like something we touched on a little while ago. And brands will be looking further out from their industry. And new companies will come along, obviously. You can think about, 12 years ago, Airbnb didn't even exist. And they're one of the best in terms of creating partnerships. Those things that you can do where they have bedrooms in football stadiums or sports grounds and all these really cool things. Like they have their issues, don't get me wrong. They're well documented, of course, in online trade, travel, media. But they've come up with some incredible collaborations with celebrities and venues and so on. And again, 15 years ago, this wasn't even a concept. It was 3 guys sleeping on someone's mattress. So as brands evolve, as new brands appear, partnerships will take on it'll create things that we've never seen before, which is super exciting because, again, if it's fun and innovative and new, you need to break through enormous clutter in terms of thousands of messages that are being thrown at you now from multiple directions. First it was radio, then TV, then the internet, now it's your phone and so on. And on that, I guess a tangent from there is, I think the medium or mediums for partnerships are going to change. It's already happening, but they'll evolve as well. You think of social media and 2 years ago, TikTok wasn't even a concept, right? It was the sound of a grandfather clock. Now it's the most incredibly evolved and fastest growing platform in history. AI, I'm not proficient in AI at all, so I don't really even want to go into it, but that's opened up things that you can do, slightly scary, if I'm honest, but also incredibly exciting to see where that goes. Podcasts or voice, things that you're doing, Phil, and that world. They've grown enormously, and people are collaborating by having guests on and organically infusing partnerships into their the auditory experience, where it almost seems so natural that people can't even tell. And that in itself raises other questions, but probably that's for a different conversation. So the mediums people are using to create partnerships in the last 5 years alone, 10 years, has evolved multiple times. And I only presume that'll keep happening. I don't even know what will happen because everything's evolving so fast now.
Yeah, I hear you. I've got one question for you before we head into our rapid fire. And I want to thank you for the time you've given today because I've learned a lot. And I think it's so nice to hear from somebody who has been on the tools as long as you have and seeing that there are some really consistent themes that persevere all the way through relationship development and the way that we create value together. There are a lot of different factors leaders are contemplating at the moment. We're trying to make sure we're leading our teams well. We're trying to make sure that we're seeing where markets are going, keeping shareholders happy. And then that's just in the professional life. We have everything in our personal lives. And I often say to people when, COVID feels like it's behind us, but I think COVID had an impact on all of our leadership lives. In fact, I feel as though it added dog years to our leadership lives to some extent because we were having to do all of these things, carrying so much. And to some extent, I think we probably still are. When people think about this concept of partnership, I often wonder why more people aren't doing it. And when I get beyond the veneer of people saying, well, I hear that they fail, and then I speak to people like you and we see, well, actually, there is tremendous value and upside in partnerships being born and built. What do you think leaders are missing about the value of partnerships?
I think some people, we kind of touched on this a little bit already, but leaders they either are too focused on the day-to-day, just can't escape from, the blinkers on view, but also trying to latch onto the coolest thing. This is now the it thing. Let's do that. Let's jump on that. And often that won't work. Your audience is not, your customers are not stupid. They'll understand that you're trying to force something. If you just stay true to who you value, what your values are, what your business is trying to achieve, maybe partnerships is not at your core of what you do, and that's fine as well. But if it is, make them valuable, make them interesting, keep the customers at the center. I mean, I know it's an overused marketing expression, but it genuinely is super important. Don't try and jump onto the coolest, shiniest thing, because you'll be found out for sure.
Great advice. Are you ready for this rapid fire?
Hit me.
All right, here we go. Question number 1, complete this sentence. Partnership is?
Mutual success.
Question 2, what content are you loving at the moment?
Content. So there's a podcast called The Contrarians. For those of you who don't know, it's two stellar business people of the Australian landscape. Adir Schiffman from Catapult Group and a number of other things that he's done. And I'm going to find myself out here. Adam. Oh my goodness. It'll come to me. He is the co-founder of Luxury Escapes. And I'm sure his name will come to me as we're talking. They talk for all things business. Adam Schwab. There we go. I knew it would come to me. Mm-hmm. They talk all things business. They really kind of break things down. They argue and they make it really accessible for people who don't know necessarily what the deal is they're talking about or what the companies they're talking about. And they're not afraid to hold back, which is what I love about people on podcasts that are they just speak and let things happen rather than trying to be non-offensive. So highly recommend that. And I also got given Elon Musk's autobiography recently, which is an absolute beast of a book. It is the thickest book I've ever seen. So I'm working my way through that, trying to learn more about the enigma of Elon. There's so many layers. It's incredible. So I haven't quite got to the end of it. Yes. Can't recommend it fully yet. I'm about halfway through.
On the date of recording, which is the 16th of October, 2024, we are a day after Elon Musk's SpaceX managed to catch a rocket as it landed back from deploying its payload. Now, we've seen these rockets land by themselves, sometimes in tandem, so they can be reused. This feels like old news, even though it still blows my mind that that's even possible. But a day and a half ago, they were able to catch a rocket and put it back onto the platform that it landed on. And I've got to say, there is thousands of people who have been involved in all of this technology. But when we go back to the center point of who was crazy enough to make that work, whether you like his politics or not, whether you're in support of the other things that he says outside of the technology realms he plays in, you do have to just look at that and just go, without that guy, we might not have got to that point. So yes, I look forward to hearing how you find that book. I've got a number of colleagues reading it as well, and they're finding it difficult to get through, given there's so much. So question 3, what's the worst piece of advice you received and why?
I know this is going to sound a little trite and I apologize, but a lot of people talk about following your dreams and your passion. And I don't subscribe to that at all, because until I was 8 years old, I wanted to be a circus clown. I'm from the Soviet Union, and the Moscow Circus is one of the most incredible experiences that a child can have. And I went multiple times. And the clowns are some of the most renowned in the world. So some people that know me, including some members of my family, will say that I haven't really drifted that far from that wish all those years ago. But passion and dreams is one thing, but I always believe identify stuff that you like, stuff that you're good at. It might be completely unrelated to what you were thinking about in school or university, but lean into that, grow that. If if we all followed our passion and dreams, there'd be nobody to lay roads and work in hospitals and everything else that drives this world. And the only other one thing I'd say is don't rock the boat. You're always told just go along with things, don't rock the boat. That's nonsense. Like, rock the hell out of the boat, because if you don't, how is anything going to get done? We're all just going to coast along. That's not fun for anybody. I mean, it is fun if you genuinely are coasting along and it's a nice boat ride, to use the metaphor, but in a business sense, in a life sense, just have a go, try something, fail, break things, whatever. I know I sound like an inspirational Anthony Edwards, a lecture, but genuinely rock the boat. That's
more people need to hear it. No, I'm with you, Yury. I'm completely with you. Question 4. When you see potential for a new partnership, what's the first thing you do to turn that potential into action?
Finding the right person to talk to is super important, because you can waste a lot of time talking to the wrong people. Mm-hmm. And honestly, if you've listened to them and there's no value that you can add right now, then just walk away or pivot to something else. But don't be afraid to time your approach at the right time. New partnerships don't always happen off the first meeting. Sometimes they happen off the 8th or off the 12th, or off an unexpected bump into somebody at an airport lounge or God knows where. So those moments happen. Serendipity is a thing. Don't force it. That's probably the best way to summarize it. Just don't force it.
I can't tell you how much I love that piece of advice. That's extraordinary. Last question. What is one thing you're deeply grateful for right now?
So this is a little bit more personal. I mentioned that my family and I'm an immigrant, like many are in Australia. My parents took an incredibly difficult decision to leave what was then the former Soviet Union, the USSR as it was known, until the early 90s, when I was a young boy, to come to Australia. We looked around the world and had different opportunities, but landed here. They were younger than me now. They were in their late 30s, early 40s when they made that journey. It was incredibly difficult. They came with nothing, not sort of metaphorically nothing, but a couple of suitcases, and that's it. And as I see, the world is a difficult place for a lot of us right now. There's lots of things going on that is scary and confronting and challenging on a personal level, professional level, for many people, many families. And them making that journey and me being here, I'm forever grateful to them. Being able to raise my family, see my kids grow up in a relatively safe environment. I mean, look, Australia is not without its problems, obviously, but there are not many places I'd rather be right now, Phil, I can tell you. So I am forever and always grateful to mum and dad for making that decision, which, as I've grown up, I've realized the level of commitment and how scared they must have been to do that, when you're 40 with a kid, to suddenly uproot your life and start the second half of your life completely in a different world, different language, different culture. So I will forever love them for that.
Amazing. Yury Glikin, this has been such a fantastic conversation. Where can I point people to learn more about you and your business?
Oh, thank you, Phil. That's very kind. So the business that we talked about earlier is Thanks. The website is thanks.co, so CO. And if anybody wants to ask me anything, whether it be obviously related to the company or anything else, they can email me, yury@thanks.co. And I would love to chat about anything and everything. Doesn't have to be work related. I love meeting new people, as I said. And stuff happens when you least expect it, when you start a conversation. So would love to chat to anybody that wants to know more about me, the company, or anything else. And super grateful for the time and the conversation also, Phil. Really, really appreciate it.
Hey, it's Phil, and thank you so much for making it to the end of this episode of Partnership Plus. If you're one of the 61% of people who have discovered this episode and you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, please go ahead and do that. The bigger the channel, the bigger the guests. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next episode.